Russia, the Moscow correspondent for the Wall Street Journal, Evan Gershkovich, is still in prison. He's been detained by Russian authorities. They claim that he was spying. He's also, now appears, that he could be jailed for 20 years. At the same time, as I understand it, the U.S. has now denied visas to some Russian journalists who wanted to cover their foreign minister in New York. Gabriele Steinhauser is the Wall Street Journal's Deputy Bureau Chief for Africa. She joins us now. Gabriele, good afternoon to you. Thank you for coming in. Firstly, your colleague, Evan Gershkovich, what do we know about the conditions he's being held under? Has anyone been able to see him?
So he is in Moscow's Levertovo prison, which is quite a notorious place, reaching back to the Soviet Union, where people used to go in and often not come out. His lawyers that the Wall Street Journal has hired have now been able to see him, and the U.S. ambassador has also been finally allowed access. And then also last week there was a pre-trial hearing in which we, for the first time, were able to see him.
From what I understand, he'd actually been in Russia for quite a long time. I mean, he's someone who's a Moscow correspondent for a U.S. publication at a time when Russia and Moscow, when Moscow and Washington are not getting on. I mean, he must know his way around quite well. Was there any indication that this would suddenly happen?
I mean, what we have seen, of course, is, over time and even preceding Russia's invasion of Ukraine, is that the space for the free press in Russia has been tightening, but it has until now been mostly targeted at local media, right? And foreign correspondents like Evan, who was accredited by the foreign ministry, so I mean they had allowed him to operate as a journalist in Russia, were, for the most part able to operate quite freely. I mean, there had been moments like other foreign correspondents have also experienced where they were on assignment and they noticed people were, following them, maybe filming them. So he knew the conditions under which he was operating, and he was aware and very, very careful because, as as a journalist, we also have not just a responsibility for ourselves, but almost more importantly, a responsibility for the people who speak to us.
What was he doing? I mean, you're going to say he was reporting. The Russians say he was spying. I can imagine the argument lawyers can have about that. But, I mean, as far as you're concerned, he was just reporting, and he'd been accredited to report.
Yeah, I mean, not just as far as I'm concerned, he has a track record as a journalist going back to the moment he graduated from college, and he hasn't just worked for the Wall Street Journal, he's worked for the Moscow Times, which is a, local publication in Russia. He's worked for Agence France Presse, which is French, so he's American, and he started working for us just over a year ago, but he's worked for other publications as well, and he has really a long track record as a reporter.
It seems, as I understand it, that the U.S. is now not granting visas to some Russian journalists. They want to go to New York to cover their foreign minister. Russia is threatening retaliation for this. Is your colleague going to be the person who suffers that retaliation?
Well, I mean, it seems like he is already being punished for something that he shouldn't be punished for, right? I mean, he is in detention for doing his job that he was accredited to do. We certainly do not want him to be caught up in the geopolitics of this because he's not a representative of the U.S. government. He's a journalist.
I mean, this is part, isn't it, of a much bigger thing happening in Moscow. You spoke about local journalists who basically have been stopped from reporting. It's very difficult to report on Russia at the moment, isn't it? I mean, inside, transparency is almost non-existent from what I understand.
It is, and I think that's why Evan felt almost a duty to do that job and, to take on the personal risk that it came with from time to time. He is the son of Soviet emigres from the Soviet Union. So he actually grew up in the U.S., but speaking Russian at home, learning about Russian culture. And he, I think felt a duty to report on Russia, not just as this sort of like dark place as it is sometimes portrayed in Western media, but, as a very diverse country with millions of people who also have diverse views.
There's so much that's going on within all of this. And I mean, we've seen the United States, there have been prisoner swaps, there have been all sorts of things like that. Do you think that he might just be caught up in some tit-for-tat action, that this is going to be something that is going to be used to sort of put pressure on the United States, and that's all there is to it? Or do you think there's something even more sinister? Could he be used to be sending a message to people in Russia? Do not act as a reporter. Do not act as a journalist. If we can do this to the Wall Street Journal, imagine what we can do to you. I mean, that would be a very chilling message for a Russian journalist.
I think it's probably both. The U.S. government has declared him wrongfully detained, which means that they consider him detained in part because he is a U.S. citizen. But I do think that because this is the first time that a foreign correspondent has been accused of espionage since the Cold War, and even before then, this wasn't something that happened every week, right? So, of course, this sends a chilling signal to anybody who wants to speak out within Russia and, in other places. And I think what we have found quite heartening is that, Russian journalists in Russia and outside who have seen their colleagues being locked up for years have also come out very strongly in Evan's support.
Is there much you as the Wall Street Journal are able to do from him? I mean, you can obviously provide legal help, you can pay a lawyer, but I don't know if it would be a good idea for the editor of the Wall Street Journal to go to Moscow right now. I mean, this is the problem that you have now, isn't it?
This is, I think, a problem that the entire world faces, right? I mean, Moscow and Russia is at the center of one of the biggest stories in the world, whether we like it or not, and, whatever view we have on this conflict or not. But it is important that, people like Evan are doing the work to explain what is happening in Russia, and that's becoming increasingly difficult.
Gabriele Steinhauser, thank you very much indeed. Do appreciate it. The Deputy Bureau Chief for Africa for the Wall Street Journal.